Hi, and welcome to the OT is In, the podcast where we merge the worlds of education and occupational therapy to empower families like yours. I'm Sarah Collins, your host, an occupational therapist and a homeschooling parent. I've experienced occupational therapy by supporting families for over 15 years, but also through seeking out support of my own children, so I'm right here in the trenches with you. Though there is not one way to educate your child, there is a lot to consider when individualizing an education. And the goal of this podcast is to explain some of the why behind what an occupational therapist is thinking so you can apply it to your own family. Especially with my three favorite topics: executive functioning, handwriting, and sensory processing. Each episode will be packed with practical tips, expert interviews, and real-life stories aimed at helping you to create a supportive learning environment for your child. So, grab your headphones and get ready to dive in of the collision of education and occupational therapy. I'm Sarah Collins from Homeschool OT, and I'm thrilled to have you with me on this journey of discovery. Welcome back to the OT is In. I'm your host, Sarah Collins, joined today by my guest, Karen, an experienced occupational therapist from Vancouver with over 24 years in the field. Today, we're diving deep into the fascinating world of sleep, particularly focusing on children and how their unique needs and behaviors impact their rest and vice versa. In this episode, Karen will break down the concept of sleep pressure and its relevance across different age groups, from babies to school-age children. We will explore the critical relationship between physical activity, screen time, and sleep readiness. You'll hear insightful tips on managing screen influence on sleep, touching on both the metabolic processes and circadian rhythms. We'll discuss the importance of sleep for the entire family's well-being, especially in neurodivergent children, and provide actionable strategies for parents, including sensory-sensitive routines and safe practices around the use of weighted sleep tools. Plus, Karen gives us her top techniques for calming a child's nervous system before bedtime and shares her favorite experiences in combining occupational therapy with homeschooling. Thanks for being here. Before we get started, I want to take a minute to talk about occupational therapy as a whole. Clearly, if you're listening to the OT is In podcast, then you have heard of occupational therapy, but maybe not the vast yet personalized role that we cover. Occupational therapy helps people develop the skills they need to perform daily activities that they specifically need and want to do. This is very personalized. Some activities everyone needs to do, like dressing, bathing, eating. Some activities are unique to an individual. I know I don't need to know how to visually track a hockey puck before someone checks me, but my son does. So we've worked extensively on those visual motor skills that he needs. So if there are areas where your child is struggling throughout the day, an OT may be able to help. Homeschool OT supports the family to figure out the why behind the struggle and then in how to use the homeschool to help your child be successful in what they need and want to do. We simultaneously educate occupational therapists on the homeschool community with the goal that no homeschool family will enter therapy and not feel supported in their educational choices. So if you have a child struggling in any activity that they need and want to do during the day, go to the webpage for this episode and download the free Why Choose OT guide. Or go to homeschoolot.com for our classes, community, and consultations so we can help support your homeschool. So now, let's get on with today's show. All right. Hey, and welcome back to the OT is In podcast. If you watch on YouTube at all, you can see I'm in a totally different surrounding today. This is kind of how you know that I'm in the trenches with you, a homeschool mom, an occupational therapist. We are actually down in South Carolina this week we are here with friends, and I'm asking, if you guys are of the praying type or are really thoughtful as far as other homeschool families. We are down here because of a family on their cancer journey. So if you can just lift up the harder family throughout your day, that would be fantastic. With that said, this is actually amazing that I can take my work with me. That's part of the beauty of homeschooling, that we are kind of everywhere. And so here we are in South Carolina, but I have my friend Karen, who is not even in the same time zone, right? But going to bring us also another occupational therapist, homeschool. And so we are going to kind of unpack a topic of sleep that can affect all of us. So, Karen, can you start first, like introduce yourself? Where are you and what do you do now?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, Sarah. I'm super
Love
excited
this.
to connect with you and share about sleep. So as you said, I'm in OT as well. I'm in Vancouver, Canada in Pacific time. So it's a little bit earlier in my day than it is in yours. But through the world of technology, we can connect from anywhere,
Here we
right?
are, right?
Yeah. So do you want me to introduce myself in
I
terms of,
do.
yeah, okay. So I've been an OT for 24 years now. I feel like a dinosaur, but there it is. And I've practiced in many different areas of OT, mostly in acute care, hospital-based for the first part of my career, and then moving out gradually into community and private-based practice in the latter part and currently right now. It's allowed me a lot of flexibility to be with my kids, that
That's the
transition
best.
from hospital-based to community-based. And yeah, and that's where I am right now. I'm mostly community-based with a tiny sprinkling of hospital in there.
Ah, so great. And now, when you were in the hospital, were you working, like, was sleep one of the areas that you really helped to cover at that point, or has that been more since your journey, since recently?
Yeah, so no, not at all. Zero. Well, it wasn't talked about in terms of like what I came out of OT school with. It wasn't really mentioned. But in my hospital time, I did a little bit of adults, acute care. I would be working with stroke patients, medical patients, a lot of facilitating return to home
Hmm.
discharge.
Hmm.
And then another part was in NICU, so very different. And in that,
Yes.
yes, we talked about sleep a lot, protecting sleep, because that's where our precious little babies will grow and develop and heal is when they're sleeping. So in that sense, yes, in a neuroprotective way. But I talk about
Yes.
sleep differently on the outside and now. Yeah.
So now you also have had a homeschool journey, correct? Like,
Mhm.
can you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. So I have two kids. They're currently, oh gosh, I always forget their ages, 7.5 and 15 and a half. So
Okay.
we're in the teen years right now. And I
Yes.
think that's kind of where you're at as well.
Yep. My oldest is 15 as well.
Okay, awesome. So we started out at a local bricks and mortar school after a really lovely introduction to school with a parent participation preschool. And the transition into a typical public school here didn't go like as well as we
Hmm.
wanted it to. We ended up having a big teacher strike one year at the end of the year, and there was quite a strong possibility that no one was going back into classes in the fall. So we were like, hey, it hasn't been as great as we wanted it to be. Let's just try homeschooling for 1 year. Let's just take a breather,
Right.
step back, and then we'll see what happens after a year. And we never went back until recently.
See, that I love we're just going to try it out for a year and then we keep trying and trying and trying. And yes, I am in that same boat. It's now 8 years later and here we are still trying it out. We're just going to see where this
Totally.
goes.
I think that's what it is, right? Every year, when you give yourself that permission to try something new, you also give yourself that permission to evaluate every year. Is this
Love
working? Is it not working? Do we need to change everything? And that's what we did every year. And there
that.
did come a point 7 years later, no, sorry, how many years? 6 years later, we homeschooled for 6 years. And then it came to a point where we decided, I think we need to transition to something different. And we
Hmm.
did. And for one of my kids, we stayed in that same stream of different. And my other kid, we tried for a year and it
Right.
wasn't a good fit. So we changed and did something else. So
I
it's
love
just that,
this.
that permission, right? To understand that every child is unique and their educational needs are unique. And
Yes.
it doesn't always fit to be in a specific program. And I'm so
Right.
grateful that we have that chance to
Hmm.
make
Hmm.
those choices for our kids.
Yes, and that there's not one right way to do this. There are multiple avenues and that continuous evaluation that
Mhm.
allows us to recognize nothing is forever.
Mhm.
So we can do what is working best. Oh, so good. So good.
Yeah.
So this has also allowed you to kind of change and grow in your, your own education, your own interests. So
Yeah.
how did you go from like what was your journey from I'm in the hospitals to now more community based and now with real focus in sleep? How did that happen?
So, okay. So it's a bit of, I'm going to make it a really short story because it feels really long. But when my eldest, who's 17 and a half, was a baby, I decided that I really wanted to have my own business. I wanted to be
Hmm.
an entrepreneur. So I went down to really minimal OT work and I launched an online, if you can believe this, cloth diaper business.
Okay. Okay.
And ran that really successfully for 5 years, sold it, and then got to the point where I was like, I need to decide what I want to do with my OT education. Do I want to go back to OT and
Hmm.
relicense? If I do, I want to do that now. Otherwise, there was many, many steps to becoming recertified if you lapsed for a
Hmm.
longer period of time.
Yes.
You know this, right? So I decided to go back to OT at that point and happened to stumble into two areas where I could reinstate my license. There's a process where you have to do a number of steps, including a competency practicum, it's called, to
Okay.
reinstate your license after a certain amount of time. So I trained with a clinic, a community-based clinic that focused on sleep in infants. And then I went back to the hospital and went back to my NICU role as well. So that's where my journey started, again with OT. And that allowed me that real flexibility with being able to homeschool and
Hmm.
to work as well.
Wow. So I'm sure many people don't know, sleep, when we are thinking as far as occupational therapists, we think of sleep as one of the areas of occupation. That's kind of the language that we use, along with education, along with play, along with the activities of daily living, which is, you're getting dressed, you're brushing your teeth, all of that. The
Mhm.
IADLs, which are more complex, so things like going to the grocery store or learning to drive, that type of thing. Social participation, education. So all of these are different areas. Many OTs can focus on all of them, because if we're thinking about kids, most of them we're doing, with the exception of work, going to work. But sleep is one that affects all across the age span, right? So from obviously from NICU all the way up until death.
Yeah.
We forever are needing sleep. So when you say now that you're working with families on sleep, kind of what does that look like?
So as I moved into the community, I worked primarily with infants and toddlers of neurotypical families. So maybe not a family that I would see as an OT in a traditional role, but families that were struggling with having their child sleep in a way that was functional for the whole family.
Mm,
I also continued to I started to work in the community with school-aged kids and preschool-aged kids with more traditional OT roles. And so looking at their regulation, their social participation, their
mhm.
fine and gross motor skills. And in that population, I was working more with neurodivergent kids and seeing the impacts and hearing the impacts from their families about sleep and how their poor sleep was really impacting their days. And not only
Mm.
the child's days, but the family as well.
Yeah, everybody's days, right? If we're all getting up at night, yeah, that absolutely makes a huge difference for parents and children and siblings all together.
Yeah, so it really affects the whole kind of ecosystem of a family. So as I moved into sleep, I wanted to look at how sleep was affecting. It's kind of the foundation, right? It's one of the pillars of
Yes.
being able to participate in all those things you just talked about, all the things we need to do and want to do to take care of ourselves, all the things we want to do outside of that, play, school, leisure, all of those things are impacted by a child's ability to sleep and ultimately the parent's ability to sleep and feel well rested because the child is dependent on their caregiver to help them participate in all those
Right.
things. So when I saw how much it was impacting the preschool aged and school aged kids that were already diagnosed with the neurodivergent brain, I thought this is where I need to focus my time. This is where I need to focus my efforts because all the therapy stuff that we're doing up here, it could be a lot better if we have that foundation of sleep
Yes.
sorted out.
Right.
The child will have more capacity and the parent will have more capacity to do the things that I say, because I'm only seeing a child, a short time per week. If the parent can be more well rested, they're able to do all of the things that we want them to do during the week to support their child's development.
So
Yeah.
true. I mean, that basis of and foundation, I love the way that you're saying that we need one of these pillars so that we can participate in what we need and want to do. So if a parent notices or, knows that their child is having a hard time with sleep, what are the first kind of questions that they should ask themselves as far as, wait, do I go and seek out assistance with this? Or is this, I just tell my kid to go to sleep? How do we know, you know, when it is time to seek assistance?
I think the biggest question is, how is it impacting your day-to-day life? So if you're finding that your child is not having the most optimal sleeping pattern and it is affecting the way that they are able to go about their day-to-day life, or you're able to go about your day-to-day life as their caregiver, then something needs to change. I think
So
that's the
hold on, before we go on even further, can you define like what is the optimal sleep pattern?
So it really differs, right? And I think that it differs for age and
Okay.
stage. So when you're talking earlier about like NICU to end of life, the patterns of sleep are going to really change over the course of a lifespan. So I think the first thing is understanding what is expected. Because then if we know what is expected, then we know if things are kind of off kilter or not. So I would have a parent understand for their child's age, what is a normal amount or an expected amount of sleep overnight over a 24-hour period if a child is sleeping during the day for naps and at night as well. So that would
And
be
I'm
the
sure
sort
we're
of
gonna
first
find,
baseline.
if we Google that, I bet we would find a bunch of different options. Is there a best resource that you would have that could say, all right, this is dependable, go here and kind of check out the developmental stage for your child?
Gosh, you've hit it on the head. There's like so much, well, for
Yeah.
everything, really, there's so much
Noise.
information out there.
Mhm.
Yeah. So National Sleep Foundation
Okay.
.org is going to be a great place to go to just reference those basic pieces of information. Yeah.
Okay.
And it'll give you that sort of time. And you know that as with anything with people, children, there's ranges of expected.
Hmm.
So not everyone needs exactly 8 hours of sleep a night for an
Right.
adult. Not every kid needs 12 hours, 11, 10. It's going to be a range based on a number of things, including their sensory profile, which is why I think OT
Mhm.
comes in really handy in
Yes.
this area. Mhm.
Yeah. Can you break that down a little bit more? How does that, our senses or our ability to organize this information that we're taking in, how does that impact sleep?
So, a few things. So, a child that has a sensitive nervous system, so sensory sensitivity, takes in everything around them and has less ability to filter out the things that are less important. So, their brain is working all of the time, bringing in all of the information, and they can easily get overstimulated during the day. So, a child that has a sensory sensitive system can tend to need help calming down at night, not necessarily calming down, but calming down their nervous system at night so they can get from here down to here to
Mm.
get into a restful sleep. A child that has a sensory system that needs a lot of input to feel just right, they need a heck of a lot more activity and movement and stimulation in their day to build up that need and physiological drive to go to sleep at night. If they haven't had all that activity, they're going to be not able to settle down and get off to sleep.
And
So,
that's so tricky because it can kind of look the same. Oftentimes kids who are trying to calm their nervous systems, you may see things like crashing, or you may see things like my son would crawl a lot at night. And what that was trying to do was to get information all through all of his joints to help calm his nervous system. But somebody might look at that and be like, he's still seeking, he's trying to get more and more and more, more activity, more energy. So I think that's even a reason why it might be good to see an OT anyway, to try to hash out that sensory profile and make sure that you are helping your child to target what they need.
totally. Yeah, I agree 100%. And many kids that are coming to me that are not identified as neurodivergent, we still do a sensory profile because everyone has a unique sensory
Mhm.
profile. And I find most of the time, the child that I have in front of me that's having difficulty sleeping doesn't fall right down the center of that bell curve. There is some outliers that need to be addressed to support their sleep.
So if that is a kind of a trigger or something where a parent's like, oh, yes, this might be a really good step for me. What are some good, like, let's say that it is a person who needs help to calm their nervous system down. What are
Mhm.
some kind of tried and true options, or, give me a few things that a parent could do, tips and tricks that could help?
Okay, so it's going to depend based on the age of the child, of course, right? What is age appropriate and developmentally appropriate? But in general, we want to, I always tell parents a couple hours before bedtime, we want to calm down the house. We want to kind of just turn the volume down on the house, the noise, the lights, the activity, the overall kind of vibe, the energy. We want it
Yes.
to be calmer. During bedtime routine, we look at what kind of things can we help with to bring down their energy, to calm their nervous system? So, as we know as OTs, deep pressure, and it's really widely known as out in the world there, deep pressure can really mitigate that overstimulation and can really gate that sensory stimulation. So anything that we can do if it's a toddler, an older child, and they can follow directions. We can do some animal walks, like crawling, like we're talking about. We can use some deep hugs. We can use some rocking and really intentional kind of firm holding when we're reading stories. We can use a weighted blanket when we're doing bedtime routine, not necessarily overnight. I don't often recommend weighted blankets for children overnight, but definitely if it feels good during bedtime routine, that's a great place to use it.
I bet
Sometimes,
some parents just went, oh, wait, why? Because I bet there are several that are using weighted blankets. Can you say, like, why do you have that opinion, and what is your recommendation on that?
so I'm often working with kids that are less than 5 years old. My concern with that is, can they safely and consistently get the blanket off of them if they want it off during the night? I don't always feel confident that a child could do that in the middle of the night. So that's why I say, let's be really cautious with this. With an older child, sure. If it
Mhm.
works for them, do what is working. Yeah.
Great.
And
I love that.
then just going back to babies, oftentimes babies will wear, and toddlers kind of up to like 18 months will wear a sleep sack. That's
Mhm.
like a sleeping bag. And there has been a kind of push in the last several years to use or to incorporate a weighted sleep
Ooh,
sack.
sleep sack.
So I always say that's a big no. Um,
Yeah.
it's unsafe. It's actually been, there's a position statement just came out recently from the American Academy of Pediatrics saying it's unsafe and not recommended. So
Mm.
if you are using one of those, I understand that it's a tool that is anticipated to help, but for a variety of reasons, it's not recommended to be compliant with safe sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that actually seems kind of scary to me, especially
Mhm.
how with breathing, oh, okay, we're going
Yeah.
to leave that one there. I'd like to take just a second in the middle of this episode to make sure that you know about the OT is in membership community. In a world brimming with parenting advice and a myriad of how to homeschool guides, it's easy to feel overwhelmed, especially when none seem to fit your unique child quite right. We here at Homeschool OT understand that each child is a one-of-a-kind masterpiece with their own distinct strengths and weaknesses, needs and desires, interests and dislikes. That's why the Homeschool OT membership exists, to empower you on this remarkable educational path. So run by me, a dedicated occupational therapist, our membership is your gateway to a world of personalized, child-centric homeschooling. The membership offers weekly office hours for open question and answer, an exclusive resource library with printables, webinars, and even research updates where the worlds of OT and homeschooling collide. There's a community forum to share and learn from others like you, and a book club to grow and be the parent your unique kids need, which even often includes time with the authors of these books. There's also discounts on consultations and other services from the Homeschool OT. So we would love to have you join to celebrate the uniqueness of your child while you gain support and understand the why behind some of your child's struggles. Also help to accommodate their needs and then support their successes and what they need and want to do. So go to homeschoolot.com to find out more about the membership, or even more specifically, homeschoolot.com/join-the-membership. Now, back to the show. So before we kind of stopped and we're talking about the weighted blankets, you were giving us some tools and tips and tricks as far as that bedtime routine to help to calm the nervous system. But what about for our kids who are sensory seekers, and maybe if they didn't get enough, sensory information during the day, and so they're really craving that before bed, how do we help there?
So that would be our kids that are a little older. And that's where I often will bring in the idea of an obstacle course during bedtime routine or before sort of the bedtime calming down routine. So with obstacle courses, I always remind parents that we want to just put in elements of jumping, crawling, crashing, but it needs to be goal oriented. I don't want you to just set your child loose and be like, run around the house, because that often ramps the energy up and increases the dysregulation before bed. So goal oriented, and also with a focus on connection. So I'll often have kind of the end of the obstacle course running and crashing into the caregiver with a big hug. So there's that kind of piece where we have that sensory regulation with connection.
And what do you mean by goal oriented? Like with a location or with an endpoint?
With not necessarily a location, but sort of goal oriented, as in I've set up 3 or 4 spots or stations or things to do. And those are the things we're going to do. And we're going to get to the end and we're going to repeat it however many times you want to do, rather than just saying, go run around outside or go run around the house, do laps. It brings in that cognitive focus as well, so that the child is thinking about what they're doing as they're doing it.
The awareness that's coming along with it. So can we shift gears a little bit? Because I often have parents who say, my child will fall asleep, but then they're up in the middle of the night and they can't stay asleep. So is there a different, round of strategies for that situation?
It's tricky. That is such a tricky thing, right? And a lot of children that are identified as neurodivergent do have issues with falling asleep. We call that sleep latency. So that time between trying to fall asleep and being asleep, and sleep maintenance. So staying asleep in the middle of the night. There's lots of reasons why that might happen. One of the things with a neurodivergent brain is that melatonin production and metabolism may be an issue, and it may be something to consider discussing with your primary care provider as an option to support. However, before you go melatonin route, there's lots of things to look at. It's just something to keep in mind, that it might not be a behavioral thing, it might not be an environmental thing, it might not be a sensory thing, it might actually be part of their physiology.
Yeah.
However, as OTs, we always look at environment, which is really key for sleep. And we look at activity during the day. When we're looking at sleep, we look at 24 hours. So a couple of things I would always look at for waking up in the middle of the night is, what does the sleep environment look like? And is it contributing to any wakings? Do we have a sensory sensitive child that during their lighter phases of their sleep hears something unexpected and alerts and orients to that, and then they're awake? Do we have a sensory sensitive or seeking child? And again, it can look the same, where in the middle of the night, or I guess when we're getting closer to the morning at this time of year, when the light starts to come up outdoors, is there light peeking into their room? And during that lighter phase of sleep, they orient to that change in their visual environment. Does the furnace come on and that noise wake them up? Are they cold in the morning? Are they too hot? So it's all the things that we need to do with their environment to make sure that it's conducive to sleep all night long. When we're looking at daytime, we need to look at how much activity did they get during the day. One of the really cool things about sleep is that as we expend energy during the day, we build up this, it's called sleep pressure. So we build up this chemical need to sleep during the day. And as we get to night, that pressure is really high. If we haven't been either awake long enough
Hmm.
or if we haven't had enough activity, we're not going to have a really high pressure to sleep. So we'll sleep for a little while, that pressure dissipates, and then we're like, well, we're good. I'm ready to wake up.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've never heard that term before. I am like, wow, I need to do some more research on my sleep. But great. That's so fantastic to have a way to really think through, okay, am I doing enough during the day to quantify? So when you're saying sleep pressure, is that different for everybody, or are there kind of norms and ranges on that too?
It's difficult to quantify that because it's an internal process. It's a
Mhm.
metabolic, process. For babies, for example, they have like a huge sleep, or their sleep drive builds really quickly. And that's why babies need to nap, because they're experiencing and doing so much in those first couple of years. And their sleep drive builds quickly. They need to relieve that sleep pressure by napping, and then they build it up again. For adults and children and school age children, there's recommendations for the amount of activity that you get in a day, and that's definitely going to be related to your sleep quality. I think that we've all experienced having days where we're really kind of sedentary. We're maybe at our desk for the whole day, or if a child is sedentary for some reason all day, they probably don't feel as ready to sleep at
Mm-hmm.
night as
Mm-hmm.
you do if you're really active and outdoors and physically moving your body. You have that sense of physical need to sleep, and that's your sleep drive telling you
Okay.
that you need to sleep.
So as kids get older, and this is happening quite frequently, we right now are in the not throes, but in the middle of a screen fast within my own family of we are not doing video games and I'm only on screens really for work because we are seeing a big difference in our children interoception basically in their ability to understand their own bodies. Do you find that screens make a big difference as far as the sleep drive?
Well, there's two pieces to that. The first is, well, let me back up just a little bit. We have two processes that help us sleep. Sleep drive, so that's your sleep,
Hmm.
your biological sleep pressure, and then your circadian rhythm, which we've all heard about. And those two processes come together at bedtime to support you to sleep. So can affect both of those processes. If you're sitting in front of a screen for many hours a day, that means you're not moving. You're not
Hmm.
expending energy. So you're not getting that metabolic byproduct to tell your brain, I need to go to sleep. So there's that piece. So yes, if a child is sitting in front of a screen, the cost is that they're not moving in that time and they're not building up that pressure to sleep. So then maybe they'll get to bedtime and it's like the right time to go to sleep, but they're like, I don't feel it. Like I can't get to
Right.
sleep. And then there's the circadian rhythm, which is the rhythm where we hear about melatonin, right?
Hmm.
And we all
Hmm.
know, we hear it over and over again, screens, blue light,
Hmm.
and inhibit the secretion of melatonin. So we want that dim light melatonin, which comes on an hour or so before you go to sleep. We don't want to inhibit that by being in front of a screen and being exposed to that blue light.
Wow. I think there's so much to think about here. We've talked about our kids' sensory processing, we've talked about our activity level during the day. We're talking about the types of activities that they need to do. So, and you've kind of mentioned when we are struggling with activity during the day to really assess and go back even thinking about sleep and how that would impact our day-to-day life. So, if parents have more questions or like that, I'm really resonating with this. What are some of the best resources that they can go to for more information?
So I think the biggest places that are good resources would be what I've mentioned already, the Sleep Foundation. It's a very big conglomerate of information around sleep, and you can look definitely into adult sleep and to pediatric sleep. The other place that I go for activities and also just general developmental pieces for kids is called pathways.org. It's not specifically around sleep, but they have sections on sleep. And
Mhm.
importantly, during the day, they have activities for kids that will help them be
Mm.
active. Because sometimes I find parents just need a little support to know what to do with their
Mhm,
kids.
mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I would like to throw in there too, The Rested Child is a fantastic book by Chris Winters. He's actually within the Homeschool OT membership doing a book club May at the end of May. Fantastic information throughout that entire book. So, how could they find you and info? Because I know you've started to put out a lot of really good information on Instagram as well. So, how can parents find you?
So I do have some information out there on Instagram. It's focused on infant and toddler and child sleep. And the Instagram account is sleepforkids.ot. And the website that I have is sleepforkids.ca because I'm in Canada. So
Ah.
you're welcome to have a look at either of those for more resources. And I'm always happy to answer questions. You can always find me there by email or by message.
Fantastic. So I want to end with this is a question that I have not started to ask. You get to be my very first person because I do get to talk to so many other occupational therapists, especially occupational therapists slash homeschool families. So what is the your most favorite story or your most favorite, intersection between homeschooling and occupational therapy that you have seen?
Okay, so when I looked back at all of our homeschool reports, we had to submit reports every term to our learning consultant. And when I look back at them, I realized that they all looked like OT reports. So my favorite thing in looking back at that was being able to collaboratively identify goals with my children and be able to address their learning needs in a way that was meaningful for them. And having that ability as an OT to creatively think about one season of Harry Potter where we could do all of Hogwarts school and interject all of their goals for learning into that and understand how that might all work. So I think that is my favorite thing about being an OT and applying it to homeschool.
Love that. You just really threw in, the activity analysis of I'm going to take this one activity, I'm going to see all the different ways of, social skills and motor skills and, our cognitive skills and just the academic pieces. And you're talking about identifying goals with your kids and, following their lead. I think it's so great. I would stick right with you on that. Well, Karen, thank you so much for being here and for sharing a little bit about sleep and about, the impact on our day and also giving some really good thinking points and strategies. So thank you again for being here.
Thank you for having me, Sarah. I really enjoyed our time.